Welcome everyone. This is the Cybersecurity in Smart Buildings and HVAC panel discussion on considerations for prevention, safety, and training. At this session, it's going to be a 1-hour session. There's going to be 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, you can hold them to the end, and then we'll have an opportunity to ask them. It's going to look at the critical interactions between cybersecurity and smart buildings, with particular focus on HVAC systems. There's been an increasing reliance on interconnected systems in smart buildings, as everyone knows, which has driven the demand of cybersecurity recently. Some of the stats that I pulled up before this session, we had 60% of IT and security professionals have had at least one cybersecurity breach in their smart buildings in the last year. Over 70% of buildings have at least one critical cybersecurity vulnerability. And the market of cybersecurity in building automation systems globally is estimated around 20 billion annually, and this is expected to rise. So it's definitely a hot topic. This session will look at some of the key challenges, some of the unique cybersecurity challenges, some vulnerabilities, some data privacy concerns, and looking at some regulatory compliance, look at some best practices in cybersecurity and how to mitigate some of these risks in HVAC systems, taking a proactive approach, looking at security by design for products and systems, and look at some regulatory and standard applications, and some collaboration between IT, OT, facility managers, and cybersecurity specialists in the space. So I'll give an opportunity for each panelist to give a couple of minutes to say who they are, where they're from, what their perspective is on cybersecurity. But essentially, we have Ryan Sen from Distech. He's going to be talking a little bit about product development in cybersecurity and interoperability. Chris Larry from EXP, looking at most likely planning and integration of systems. Lewis Parks from Veridify, looking at the OT component of cybersecurity. And Louis Descarakis from Daikin, looking at a manufacturer's perspective and design for security for products. So I guess we'll go down the line here from Ryan, if you just give a brief introduction, and then we go down the line, and then I'll have a series of questions, really just for the whole panel, and then anyone can take them as you see fit.
Sure, perfect. Thanks, Greg. So Ryan Sen, Vice President of Corporate Development, Corporate Real Estate at Distech Controls. Been with the organization 20 years now. This is my 19th consecutive ASHRAE conference, so very excited to be here with all of you today. Pretty loaded question. What are my viewpoints or philosophy around cybersecurity? Without getting too philosophical, I believe each and every single one of us is responsible for cybersecurity. So what does that mean? Let's peel back the onion a little bit. When we look at the advent of smart buildings, we see more and more systems being integrated. What we're actually doing is we're increasing the surface area for targeted attacks, right? And so as we do that, we open ourselves to more vulnerabilities, and we need to do our respective parts. So my philosophy is that everyone in the food chain, from your installing contractor all the way up to your BMS vendor or manufacturer, needs to have responsibility to drive cybersecurity home.
So my name's John Descarakis. I'm the CISO at Daikin Applied, which is, I think as most folks know, a large commercial industrial manufacturer of HVAC systems. I've been in this world for a bit. I've worked at a couple of different industrial manufacturers where I've had various roles, including CPSO, where I focused on the technologies and the controls and making sure everything was secure. Before that, I was in aerospace for a while, where I kind of did similar things, more focused on building the actual systems to be secure end to end. So going to the question of philosophy around cybersecurity, I really liked your answer, because I also agree it sort of takes all of us to get the job right. And the reason for that is because cyber has risks in virtually every element of building systems. So often I think we have to work backwards in understanding what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. Not every system can be secured in the same way. So collaboration and connectivity with different folks in our space actually helps us get the job done a little closer to accurate. It's, when we think we have things right, we often don't. That's what got me into security. And also, we think we have excellent security controls in place, and maybe at the time we do, but attackers evolve how they do things, and the attack surface keeps growing as emerging technologies come out. So the job of the security professional is virtually never done. We're always having to rethink how we're doing things, because we also have to balance performance, and it doesn't matter what type of a system, whether it's a traditional IT system or a product system or OT, which is very difficult actually to secure. So it's actually a complicated space.
Hi, I'm Chris Larry. I'm with EXP. We're a design consultant, and that's kind of what my role on this board is as a design consultant. Although we do master systems integration and commissioning things. But one of the things that I wanted to voice is the fact that design consultants typically, when they look at cybersecurity, it's really not on their viewpoint, and I'd love to hear your opinions on that. But I think it should be, and there's some things that we could really look at. The NIST Cybersecurity Framework version 2.0 is a good reference. And of course, one of the things that they do is basically 6 functions: govern, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And then also, while we're here at the ASHRAE conference, there's the expo here, and then over across the way at the hotel, there's the actual conference going on. ASHRAE standard 135 is a good standard to approach, and then the BACnet SC, which is Secure Connect, is a good compliance. They have a guide for you, and that guide talks about network segmentation, which is basically separating your networks, user access, so multifunction factor authentication, hardening, device hardening, having regular updates of your firmware, data encryption, making sure you monitor who's on your network at all times, and then physical security, locking cabinets and locking rooms, and then standards compliance, what we just talked about. And then, when you're looking for a contractor, make sure you look at their reputation, their track record, what features that they might provide. And then one of the things that hardly anybody does is really focus on training cybersecurity of their products. And that's something I think we need to do, but I'm sure we'll get into that. So, Louis?
Okay. So I was wondering what I'd do for an introduction. So my name is Louis Parks. I'm with a company called Verify Security. So my founding partners, they are mathematician cryptographers. And we actually have come to the building business through one of our microprocessor partners, Intel, and have been introduced to this world. We have a little bit of a different view and a lot of buyer beware. So there is, first of all, no single solution that protects anybody anywhere. We took a device approach. Our specialty is how to protect devices at the edge of a network. In this case, a building network, could be BACnet, industrial, we've done automotive projects. But the issue is that device running something critical in the building that might only cost $50 or $100 is running on the lowest cost processor the OEM could get away with delivering and still deliver that capability. And yet the security that you use to get on Amazon or your bank or what have you really requires the little supercomputer that we all carry in our pockets or on your desktop, what have you. So there's a bit of a disconnect there. And the second thing that we found entering this industry is that there's never been a real need for cybersecurity until a few years ago, make it a decade, what have you, because these were all isolated things, what are called air-gapped in the technology world, meaning they don't connect to anything. What are you protecting? Don't worry about it. Well, lo and behold, fast forward, everybody wants to have a dashboard and be connected and see all these great things, so you need to protect it. And that realization has come late. So what you have is a lot of IT solutions, which are network-based solutions. A lot of people from IT believing that they'll fix it. You all work in an industry where there are no boundaries. So the attack is not on the 5th floor in HR or sales or patient data in the hospital. It's in a building 700 miles away as part of your portfolio that you now need to address. So some of these things work, but arguably why they were built, there's a mismatch. Because in the IT world, when the patient data gets attacked, you use something called network segmentation to isolate the network while the IT person goes up and takes the server offline and puts a new one on. If you have an OT network running a critical function in a data center or in a hospital, can you really just isolate it immediately and everybody who's inside that segment while you wait for somebody to show up to fix it? So in the OT world, in the world you operate in, it's about maintaining process, maintaining operations, and doing it safely. In the IT world, it's about protecting data. You know, is that USB thumb drive you found in the parking lot just plugged into my network? And as I always joke, and I said last night, nobody's sitting in facilities going, gee, did somebody bring a thermostat from home and try and plug it in? So it's a different world. And what you do there, BACnet SC is certainly a good start. Maybe not all the tools are there for implementing it. Maybe some of you are confused how you implement it. And of course, the fact that there are 5 million plus operating buildings that are probably not going to wholesale replace all their equipment so they can take advantage of it is an issue.
The first question of the panel here is, what's the #1 risk or hole in cybersecurity?
Yeah, I think it's the growing attack surface, right? We're creating those holes and opportunities every day with every device, every building that we bring online. So I think that's part of the challenge, and it's part of what it behooves manufacturers to be able to implement cybersecurity, robust design, what we call secure by design type architecture throughout our portfolio.
Yeah, I won't disagree. The attack surface, not just the fact that it keeps growing, it also evolves. Things that we think we know how to defend today, there will be new ways to attack tomorrow. But if you look at the root core analysis of all of the issues we try to manage in security, most of the time it comes back to the human factor. You know, whether it's a misunderstanding of technologies or connecting the wrong technologies together, doing it in a way where it doesn't work so well. So, you know, Lewis was talking a moment ago about some OT realities that we deal with in this industry. So a lot of the IT security tools are not really developed to secure things like BACnet and Modbus protocols. Those protocols, when you're connecting to cloud environments that are going to pull data out and do cool things like data analytics and give you information on your phone, those protocols, you know, like MQTT on the other end of it that's connected into the cloud, these things are not designed really to work well together. So usually we're using gateways, and there's all kinds of data that can get lost. There's a lot of prep work that has to be done to make that sort of cloud-enabled OT world a reality. And there's a lot of security vectors that can open up, and a lot of that gets drawn back, in my opinion, to sort of the human factor.
Yeah, and I would agree with you, the human factor, that was my answer, and that's why I talked about training and keeping on top of that, because that's really, if you're gonna have a breach, that's really, it's gonna be where it is. And then the other item is using managed switches. You know, there's too many times where you go into a BAS system and you open up a cabinet and there's a little Netgear switch that's just, nobody knows what it's for. You just plug it in, you can have total access to the network. Those have to go away.
I'm not sure what the #1 issue is. So why attack a building? You know, what's the point? You know, 10 years ago, it wasn't technically an attack. It was really a door left open. The target attack stole 30, 40 million credit cards. You know, the infamous part about it is it went through the HVAC system. So, you know, is it really critical that we protect the fact that the room was set at 72 degrees, what the set points are? Like, is data that critical in a building? Probably not. Probably, you know, again, there's an emerging world of things called siegeware, where if I can take your hospital down until you pay me in whatever the coin of the day is to let it operate again, maybe that's the number one thing. You know, the ability to impact operations. If I can change the temperature in your data center such that I threaten all your servers until I let you get control back. First talk I ever heard, and by the way, the difficulty and what's the number one thing is, because there's no reporting requirements, we're all sitting here going, well, we all know of some things, but we don't all know the same things. So, like you don't know that there was a 40-story building in Israel that was taken offline, took 3 months to get the elevators working. Is that the number one issue? So I think the exposure through the internet and us connecting everything together to make your customers happy is probably the number one threat.
Next question is, why should a BMS manufacturer invest in security by design product development practices?
Great question. I could kind of kick off with that one. Just a quick show of hands. Is anyone here familiar with the term zero trust architecture? Okay, we got to not on the panel, guys. Come on. No, great. So there's a few hands that went up there. So, you know, when we look at the number of IP devices that there are in a building today, imagine every DDC, HVAC, BMS controller is today more and more an IP-based controller. That individual node now acts as a potential attack surface. And this is where adopting a zero trust architecture at the edge, at the node level, is where we can start to implement true cybersecurity in terms of a secure by design approach. And so in the zero trust architecture, you know, you need either the collaboration, support, or the BMS manufacturer, vendor themselves to be able to enable that level of cybersecurity at the node level. And back to my philosophy, it behooves all of us, we're all responsible for cybersecurity, and so this is a great opportunity for BMS vendors and manufacturers to be able to help deploy the zero trust architecture by supporting it at the individual node or controller level.
So I'm a big fan of zero trust architecture, but for me, and I've got responsibilities that span IT, OT, factories, products, IT enterprise stuff, so there's a wide array of things. The problem, though, with that sort of architecture in the OT world, as Lewis was pointing out earlier, data isn't really the focus point of security, although you want to secure your data that's in the OT environment, of course. It's actually, so it's not confidentiality that is sort of your number one concern in OT, but it's actually availability. There are systems that have to just continually be running, and you can't have them going down. So there is typically, with zero trust, you're authenticating users, components, all the elements. That slows things down, and sometimes it stops things from working. So there are strategies that you can implement in OT. Zero trust in OT is different than how it would be rolled out for IT. And this is where the context of what you're trying to do and what you're trying to secure and why, if you work backwards from the outcome statements, you'll get to the right sort of answer. But the way you want to implement security in many cases in the OT environments is a little more sort of permissive, where you're allowing things to happen that you wouldn't allow in the IT environment. You're doing a lot of logging, you're whitelisting certain components, and you're allowing those identities to connect together in a different way. But it's a great architecture, but we have to be careful how we roll it out when we're talking about OT.
Yeah, and Greg, I think your question really comes down to the fact that you don't want your name in the news with cybersecurity breach. So that's the type of investment you want to make. And whatever that investment is, you balance it with what happens if you don't. And so there's a balance there. How much investment, you got to make that decision.
So I want to make sure I have the question. So this is for putting cybersecurity in systems to deliver to the market, right?
Yeah, like a BMS manufacturer's perspective, why are they going to do security by design products?
So the reason we're probably going to do it is for the people who aren't in the room. and for different reasons. And I gave the example last night. Building owner, why do they care? They don't really. They're looking to minimize expenses. So, when we came to the industry, we were told, blah, 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 build this for BACnet. And what we do is we only work inside a building. So we're device focused inside a building, locking it all down. BACnet IP. And then I'm in the East Coast, and guess what? I discovered that there's a thing called MSTP. That's the old stuff. And it's really still around a lot because you can run really long wire runs, and it's inexpensive. And the people paying the bills like that. I think you do it because you can tell somebody that their rent roll is not going to be interrupted. I think forward looking, and the world's not getting a safer place. I think that the newspapers or press or however you get your information pretty much every day validates that there's a cybersecurity issue out there. And certainly for other people who are your customers who are looking to create something, there's a value in investing in it. It adds to the value of the building. I'm told it leads, and I'm not intimate with all of it, but the plaques I see in the lobbies of buildings adds 3 to 7% to the value of a structure if it's implemented at the highest levels. And I would strongly suggest that an investment in cybersecurity from a good BMS vendor who's providing you the tools and the ability to do it is a great value add and differentiator. And that's probably why you want to do it.
I'd like to add on to that as well, because I think we all skated around the same theme without actually saying it. One thing that's true is that OT is a soft underbelly in the attack world, and most attackers know that. And so the reason people want to invest into building automation systems, security and training and these kind of things is because we have to defend these things in a different way. It's harder. It's not as simple. So putting those investments there is going to help you manage risk. If we only look at the IT side of the world, you're leaving a lot of risk on the table, and folks know how to exploit it these days, and it's happening. It's been in the news.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I mean, if you're inherently deploying security at now, I'll call it the product level, suddenly it becomes product configuration, and it becomes that configuration, that maintenance now becomes inherently part of maintaining that product. So theoretically, that should simplify things.
So I would just add on to the add-on, because why not? So I think it's really critical that you have BMS manufacturers sitting at the far right side who are investing time and effort to do this at the beginning. And what's really exciting is somebody like a Dike and Apply, large industrial, great heritage with a CISO, because this says there's something to the cybersecurity stuff. This is the point where I put up my slide that shows the entrance into a parking lot during the winter. And I come from Connecticut, so there's snow on the ground, and we all know those arms that go up and down. And the slide that I use there is a driveway going into a parking lot where the arm goes up and down, and you can see the tire tracks that have driven around it into the parking lot. So doing one thing may provide a sense or feeling of security, or you can say to somebody with a C above you, check the box, yes, we do have cybersecurity, but what is it you're delivering? And you do need this holistic view. It is the soft underbelly, and you do need to work with people who are investing time and effort from the manufacturing and industry side, because it's a very broad space. And even if you're using a secure controller and all the devices on the walls and ceilings are insecured plugging into it, there's my back door. There's that driveway around the secure element. So it's a sophisticated space. Takes probably more time than in the seminar time we have, but it's a good place to start.
Well, it can be an unsophisticated space too. So there's a very famous attack in a casino where somebody leveraged the OT network to get into, of all things, a fish tank. But they used that to pivot into the actual important stuff, which was the data repositories that connected to the money for the casino. So this is another reason why the OT elements are super important. So it's all really a super system. Things are going to connect together in this world that we're in now. So to your point about the tracks of the tires going right around the single security control, if we don't look at it as a super system of many different components working together and look at the big picture, we fail. Absolutely right.
And I think some of this may already been addressed, but in terms of design for security, how important are requirements, and how do security professionals ensure they implement the right requirements? Don't necessarily have to go down the line. You
Okay.
can just anyone
Yeah.
could just pick it up.
I could jump into that because that's really my world. So security requirements are one thing, and a lot of times when engineers and system designers are approaching the security folks, or vice versa, security folks are coming at them. The mistake that's made, and this will reinforce Lewis's point, is that we sometimes just focus on the actual security requirements and not the rest of the requirements of the system. The system needs to operate, right? So whether it's an IT system or if it's a product system or if it's a controller that's connected to a chiller, we can make the most secure technology in the world and turn it into a brick that nobody wants to use or doesn't work the right way. So we have to find the right balance of performance and security, and that's actually not that easy. And the reason I talked about the requirements is we have to understand what all of the system requirements are, what the performance requirements are, what the outcomes, what the stakeholder viewpoints are, and the user experience. All that stuff has to get balanced in, because then we actually understand how we should best secure the thing. Because there are many different ways to install security and manage risk and identify risk and do these things. But in the old days of security, the security professionals come in and wave the magic wand of security and install controls that didn't work for anybody else. So requirements are fundamental to actually ending up with a good system that performs well.
It also goes a bit beyond that in terms of scope. So, of course, we referenced NIST earlier, but what is the equivalent of NIST in other geographies, right? So there are, if you're developing a truly global product for the global market, then you have to be able to cater to all of the different standards, and of course, many, do conform to NIST, but then there could be outliers, and what do you do? What do you do in that case, right? So it is really critical to understand the requirements, even from a geographically dispersed perspective.
Yeah, and from a master systems integration standpoint, we're dealing with a whole bunch of different controllers or devices or systems and trying to make them communicate over a whole network. And so sometimes security procedures kind of get in the way of that communication. And you can't let that lax. You can't say, well, to get this to communicate, we've got to, go on this port, or we have to use this IP address. You need to stick to whatever your safety standards are, and then deal with that, and don't let them lax. And that gets back to training of your people and making sure that they, reset their password every so often, and make that a requirement. And if they don't log in after 2 months, they get dropped off. Those types of things are really important.
So what we did is we started with stop the attack. What do you have to do? Figure it out. So that was our thing. By the way, there's all these ISO and documents. Everybody here 62443. There are standards, and these are standards which you can go to a lab and be measured against, which shouldn't be confused with guidelines, which is what NIST issues. So zero trust is 5 pillars, which are very important, and everybody should adhere to it. If you ask the NSA, there are 7 pillars, but it's still good stuff. ETSI in Europe was something we attend, good standards to adhere to also. And by the way, their headquarters is about 15 miles from the border of the Mediterranean Riviera, so it's a great place to go to meetings. You want to do that standard too. Anyways, but you can look at all of these things and try to adhere to them in terms of meeting your design goals. And again, to me, it simply was, we need to stop the attack. Why do we need to stop it? Because you guys, very generalization, somebody out there will have it, if you're from a hospital or university, but you typically don't have an IT team. You don't have somebody with John's skill sets there ready to go. So when you tell the facilities person or the building manager, hey, there's something happening to the controllers on the 27th floor, the elevators won't work, or the lights seem to not be listening to us anymore, what are they going to do? So you can be told this information. You know, it's like a fire alarm, goes off. If you're not a fireman, all you have is information now you can act on, but you're not the person who can do the acting. So I think there's going to be some different requirements in terms of how you approach it and what you do and what's practical. And by the way, this is the don't try this at home part. On the immediate horizon, you may have seen things in the news, and I talked about it briefly last night, called quantum computers. Why did I bring it up? Because the security that we're implementing today, generically implementing, will be broken in 5 or 6 years. And a lot of you in the audience install things that are going to be out there for 10, 15, 20 years. So it will be simply broken X years out. How are you going to replace it? Because a lot of what we're putting in will need to be updated. And we all carry these things which update every couple of weeks, where in your industry we're looking at things that have been on the wall or ceiling for 10, 15 years and never seen a line of code or what have you. It's a new thing to the industry, and what does that infrastructure look like? How are you going to enable that? So again, it's a broader landscape, but the primary goal should be adhering to these standards, the training, using it correctly, and stopping the attacks.
The next question is like, we all know cybersecurity is important, and we see how it's been addressed in the IT world. Why does it seem so difficult to do in building automation systems and networks to run them? And what are the unique challenges? So basically bringing it back to building automation systems, why is it so difficult?
Yeah, and I'll start with that one. You know, the IT industry has people that they look at it every day, but the OT, you know, the BAS, there's not people out there trying to make sure that, you know, monitoring the network, making sure that things aren't falling, updating their software and everything. That needs to be invested in more. And we need to take these things from the IT network and put them over on the OT networks.
Yeah, so this goes back to the philosophy of zero trust at the node level. So imagine your BMS controller can do that, can implement NIST at that node level, right? To be able to identify the threats, to be able to actually protect through, you know, encrypted communication, right? And then be able to detect and respond right at that node level. So that's game-changing and almost I consider an easy button, right? That takes out a lot of complexity if you can have that model and have all of that done right in that controller to begin with.
So I don't disagree with anything you guys are saying, but if you think about what's the root cause, why do you find in sort of the BAS worlds that there's a lack of patching and updates and the things that you find very commonly in the IT world? And so there's less connectivity, right? We're not typically remoting into these systems. They weren't designed that way. There's a lot of legacy systems that have been out there for a long time that don't support any of these things. You have to roll trucks to make updates. You have to flash firmware. Many of the systems weren't designed. They were designed years ago. But there are systems these days that are designed to support this. There are ways to create gateways into these environments and flash the updates as you need it. The newer technologies support these needs. But at the same time, a lot of these components were fielded 15, 20 years ago when no one was thinking about it. So we have to get very creative about that. It's definitely a problem to be solved and managed, but it's hard to go to the building owner 20 years later and say, hey, you should tear out those systems and install these because they're more secure. So we have to find a more creative way to do it.
Perfect segue. So we are not building people. We don't make any, you can't come to us for a controller, but we're meant to protect them. So why is it so hard? It's because Apple hasn't entered this business. Because if Apple was in this business, none of you could put anything else on their system but Apple. And it would all work nicely connected together. And every building we go into has some of this and some of that. So we had to build a solution that did not interfere with the network and protect all these different devices. But that's hard to do. And it's hard to ask, you know, Disk Tech, how are you protecting the allergen stuff, et cetera? Because they do a great job of theirs and the systems they talk to. But I think that the challenge is, other than a new build situation, what we see is a lot of different stuff in a given site, but it all needs to interact. And again, the industry, ASHRAE has done a great job making sure if it says BACnet, by God, it's going to talk to other BACnet things, whatever they are. I think there's going to be implementation challenges with things like BACnet Secure Connect, because you need something called certificates to make it secure. And there isn't an independent certificate authority for the building industry yet, which means you have to create the certificates. And that means that if Honeywell's the first one there, and the next person in is Schneider, and Schneider needs certificates, Honeywell says, well, what are you putting in the building? Tell me all of those devices you think you sold the owner so far, et cetera, because they need certificates for them. So there's a bunch of implementation issues. The technology will work, but it makes it hard because there's a level of cooperation needed that may or may not exist yet. You have all these disparate products and platforms that need to talk to each other, which we know it's hard to do. And that's a barrier, even though the outcome, everybody wants the same outcome.
Is IP more of a concern for BAS systems?
IP as in a network or IP as an intellectual property?
I don't.
As the network.
As the network communication, like.
Yeah, I mean, we did a project at a DoD base, and the idea was that it was a pilot, because it's not a project, and it was successful, and they didn't want to roll forward with this critical building that did very critical things for things that flew up in the air, because the technology was really old, and they perceived that was protecting it. Because if you move to an IP platform, you're opening yourselves up to the world of communication. Ironically, those twisted pair things then talked to IP controllers that got on IP networks, and the exposure was there anyways. But yeah, information in networks is a great tool, and it's going to drive a lot of great things if it isn't already, and we know it is already. But what you find out is there's all this traffic running beside your building traffic on those networks. The highway has many lanes, and people don't think about that. So as we're locking down parts of it, there can be other parts that are an issue. So IP, to John's earlier comment, and I think Finn's earlier comment, it's opening the thing that we call the attack surface.
Correct.
It's giving them a broader place to come and play.
Yeah, and I would think, IP in our industry, we think of IP as more of a detriment to cybersecurity. But I think a reverse thought is that now IP has so many more capabilities that you got to look at those capabilities and advance them so that they do better cybersecurity than what you had before, because the twisted pair that you talked about really comparatively had no intelligence to it.
Yeah, I still find myself shaking my head when, brand new development going up, world-class leading cancer research institute, and they're still talking about twisted pair, right? This is going to be a flagship, game-changing, high-end research facility that's only going to open in 5 years, and you're putting in 30-year-old technology, right? To only be 35 years old day one, right? So they're immediately limiting their capability for that property or asset to evolve. And so, you hit the nail on the head. Yes, with IP, you have the potential to create additional attack surface. But this is where it comes down to training. It comes down to secure by design principles. It comes down to BMS vendors who are investing in being able to deploy zero to your architecture. But then the other aspect to it is the fact that at points with complex infrastructure, IT or OT infrastructure, there may be not a brand preference, but a particular technology preference by those that are architecting or deploying that network. And this is where, part of our philosophy is what you said, collaboration. We are very proud of our digital partner program, whereby we allow end users to have best of breed choice. So in fact, Veridify is one of our digital partners, and you could pair their solutions with our solutions as edge controllers in the field as well. So I think that concept of interoperability helps us effectuate what I said earlier in terms of everyone does their part when it comes to cybersecurity.
Yeah, I want to go back to the topic of training because, look, advancing systems that don't typically connect outside of a closed loop environment is not a new thing. And the fear that it's going to become actually more vulnerable is not really actually based on reality. And, years ago I was in aerospace and we had many closed loop systems that we started connecting differently. And it just requires elbow grease. There are ways to get it done. Certificates is one element that helps you understand the authenticity of components. But there are many, many more things to think about. It's a big space, and going back to the training, training is critical in every company. And early on, you were saying that cybersecurity is everybody's responsibility, and that's true. Everybody has a different role to play. So there has to be role-based training. So I'm not going to give the engineers and the developers who are tasked with taking systems that are communicating over BACnet and moving it to secure BACnet, and then connecting that to MQTT so it can actually get out to the cloud and be internet-facing. All those handshakes are not that simple. And there are many elements that have to go into that. So I'd want to train those folks differently than I would train executives at my company and to help them understand what not to do with their cell phone. And differently than folks in the manufacturing line who have a different responsibility. But it all starts to come together. There's different types of training for different folks, and if you're very considerate about it, and it costs more, it's harder to do role-based training, but that's actually what's needed.
And before we go to the audience for questions, if everyone could just go down the line and say, what would your action items or takeaways be for the audience in terms of cybersecurity in the built environment?
Yeah, so for me, key takeaways, yes, each of us are responsible for cybersecurity. We've got to do our own part. It does behoove BMS manufacturers to invest in being able to deploy zero trust architectures and really bring this concept of secure by design to life. There are also additional cost-saving benefits to being able to deploy such technology. Whenever you're able to reduce complexity, you're able to potentially drive cost savings. Even from a long-term cost savings perspective, when you have many disparate tools and systems, there could be complex maintenance agreements or requirements. And so there's potential cost savings to be able to simplify and use a secure by design architecture. And lastly, training. Training is what keeps it all together.
For me, the key takeaway I think folks should walk away with, and if you think about the theme, we've been saying sort of different things, but it's all tied together by the same thing. Zero trust and training and certificates, all these things are elements of proactivity. So for me, it's be proactive. And a lot of folks take that the wrong way and think that I'm saying make investments in security. That's kind of part of it. But when I say be proactive, what I mean is expect that your systems will get exploited, because they will. And start working backwards from there and think about what are the things that are important to me to protect? What are the key elements? How do I protect them, and start working backwards? Just expect things to happen that are not going to be good. Because if you're ready for that stuff and you can recover quickly, you're going to save yourself a lot of time and money. That's proactivity.
Yeah, and I think we talked early on about cybersecurity is everybody's responsibility, and when we get back to the designer, the building designer, try to think when you're designing a building, think about cybersecurity and how that's going to affect your design, because I think it's really important. It is your responsibility. And then there's so many great resources, and I think we talked about a lot of them here. Invest a little bit of time, get to know those resources, go through those guidelines. That's really important. And then the humans are the weakest link, so make sure you invest in training and having some phishing statements within your organization to make sure that you test your people, because once you test your people, they'll start learning, hey, that I shouldn't have done that.
Echoing things that are said, everybody needs to be involved. You may not be in a position to actually affect a solution or create a solution, but you're in a position to figure out the value. If you think there's no value, you've made a huge mistake. There's always value, at least from the attacker side perspective. And it can take a lot of different forms. I used an example last night, and just I'm repeating because, Greg, you're the only one who heard it, so you can act surprised. But what's the value of data? Anybody have a car where you can see the air pressure of your tires? That's because there's a little wireless transmitter in the wheel hubs, and it says it's your car. And I will tell you that government agencies have looked at using that data at the border to track who and what and where. So there's the value of the data of the air pressure in your tires. So when you think that the data in your buildings has no value, you may be surprised, and an attacker may surprise you at some point in time. There are people who are investing time, effort, and bringing people on, in terms of the products they're building, like at Distech or Daikin with John on board and what have you, and you want to pay attention to those people in your industry as to what the solutions are and what you can bring to your customers. That'll be a difference maker, and it'll let you sleep a bit better at night.
With that, we'll go to questions from the audience. Is any questions?
I get a question.
Sure.
I'm in the InfoSec space, and we typically deal with CIOs, CISOs. They're the owner of security, for IT security. And over like the past 5 years, now these two worlds are colliding. IT, DAS, the control system. Who do you think, or in your opinion, who is the owner of DAS security?
Depends on which company you're talking to, right? So it's different everywhere. So where I've been in this industry for a little while. I'm new at Daikin Applied. I just joined last September. Who owned it when I joined was questionable. Since I've joined, it's becoming a little more clear. If you were to approach me about security issues, whether it's in the IT enterprise world or the BMS systems that we might connect to through the products that we manufacture and sell, I'm your person. We're building platforms, cloud connected technologies. I'm still your person, right? So but inside of the company, there are many people that are working together to get to the right outcomes, because I don't know everything, despite what I tell my wife.
The key is collaboration, right? Like we said, everyone is responsible. Everyone in that food chain has to be responsible. That CIO at the end user, right, that is protecting their assets, right, has to work with the right engineer that's specifying the right secure design, that's specifying the right product and solution to be used in that design, down to the contractor who's now physically installing and commissioning and then servicing that building, right? So it's the entire food chain.
Well, there's who's responsible, who's next on the line if it goes wrong, and then who's all working together to make sure it's right. And that's not just all the folks inside of that company we're working with, but also if we're working with you, I'm going to expect that it's a two-way street.
Absolutely.
And you're helping me with stuff.
Yeah, I think this is a great question, because we had a project we just finished recently that was a financial organization. And we brought this to, we were systems integrator, and we were talking about just this subject is, okay, we're going to build this network. Who's going to take it? Who's going to, and nobody raised their hand. And it was all the IT people. And they knew that they had this many people, and they weren't getting more people, and it was twice as much work. So they didn't raise their hand, and it almost killed the job. So you need to have somebody step up and take responsibility.
So I assume you're asking in terms of at a building or at a endpoint site.
I'm actually more, we always preach, work your way back from the microphone. You just got breached, you're now in front of the microphone, and you're going to say, hey, this is what I did to prepare for this incident. Who's in front of the microphone right now? Is it the CIO, the CISO, Is it your plant manager? Is it your?
No, because when you're putting that, it's changing. So it is changing. So I guess my view is a little different. By the way, this is decades old. So I'm really old. I started off in the technology and IT world, and I will tell you, many decades ago, if you're selling an accounting system, it started off with, the CFO saying, well, the general ledger needs to be able to do this, and we need these codes and whatever. And then later it became, well, ask the CTO, because we've got to be able to distribute, the accounting to this group, and sales has to be national, and what platform can support that. So you tell us who we can use. So is it the IT group or was it the operator? And so it's the same thing here, who's responsible? And my approach is, the building people may know they need it, but may not have the skill sets. The IT people have the skill sets. They may not perceive that they can be bothered, or they have extra time or energy, etc. I will tell you from a practicality point of view, the budget for this, cybersecurity, is going to be in the IT side, which is typically not who's issuing the purchase orders for the BMS equipment. So there isn't a ready answer, and in fact, part of the process, not post the attack, but pre the attack, is how you bring those siloed entities together. Again, in larger environments, hospital, university campuses who have a full IT/BMS, whatever, that's already happening. It's in some of the commercial spaces below a REIT where you may have some issues getting the right parties in the room together.
Well, the harder it is to find you're responsible, though, when there's actually a problem and you're trying to get it solved quickly. If you have trouble finding who is responsible, who is the person that can put me in touch with all the right people to close the issue, that's probably a company you don't want to partner with, because they're making your life harder and they're making your risk profile go way up. So, if the companies you're working with are responsible, they'll have somebody that should be your point of contact for any security issue. And then those people behind the scenes will go cobble up the troops and make sure that your problem is solved quickly, or our mutual problem maybe. Depends on what we're talking about.
Here.
Follow-up question, which standard, there's standard and governance process and policies each building company should have, which standard would answer with this ownership?
So standards there are many standards in the cybersecurity world, and they're all based on.
To solve an ownership, like when you have a crisis, you should open a book and you go through the steps in order to
Yeah.
happen. And then
There's no real standard that solves the organization structure for a company.
Well,
And
there
they
are
have to do
standards
that.
for incident response
Yes.
and different things, but there are many different standards in the cyber world that are really context-based. So there are standards that talk to you about things that you should be doing for cloud security. There are other standards. So 62443 was mentioned earlier. That's a standard that came up through the oil and gas industry, and many industrial control manufacturers are going to that standard because it mostly aligns with what they're doing. My boss and I were talking earlier about PCI standards. So if you process payment and money, there's different standards related to that. So, I've built an operational model where I'm at, where you will see like 40 or 50 different standards that our business needs to comply with for different reasons. So there isn't really one magic bullet of standards, but they all tend to borrow from each other. So there's sort of like this 60 to 80% overlap. So once you start to become very good at standards compliance, and standards are sort of your guardrail to keep you going in the right direction. It's not an absolute, you're secure because you do the standard. But it is a good way to talk to your consumers and to your partners, say, look, we're compliant with this, we get audited, we're transparent. That's kind of the point, is
But
guardrails.
I think you answered her question. What you need is an operational model, right? That you're pulling the right standards.
governance on standard.
Correct.
Like as this organization structure.
So some people have attempted to solve this, and by the way, politics aside, so for example, there's a group called the Building Cybersecurity Organization, and they've spent a fair bit of time taking 62443 in industrial, ISO 27001, NIST's guidelines, not standards, 800-53, and you can ramble off these things ad infinitum, and put them together into a comprehensive building package. So that, now, it doesn't necessarily protect you, it certainly is a great awareness process, because what it basically enables is an audit of your building to say, how does it match up to what we have done by taking all these various aspects and applying it to a building. So how did your building score? Did it get a 50, a 70, a 90? And of course, if it's a 50, you might want to do some remediation and some things. If it's a 90, you probably did well. It actually doesn't give you a solution, but it does give you an ability to measure, arguably, where you are. And then, because, again, no shock, it's a bunch of vendors, and we're a member, who are members of their, so we all then go, well, we can help you with this, or we can help you with that. And you're back to figuring out who you're going to with it and who you're going to sell. But there's a real estate something consortium, cyber consortium.
Real Estate Cybersecurity Consortium.
There you go.
RECC.
And again, so you have a lot of big property, REIT, blah, 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 Boston Properties, all members, and trying to do the same sort of thing in terms of awareness, giving you tools to try to at least know where you are.
I used to be on that board, by the way. But there's also software that does exactly what you're talking about. So it'll take all the different standards and put them in sort of a way for you to understand what are my actual fundamental requirements to be compliant with all these standards. Removes the human element. It's kind of nice.
So let's hear it for AI. Got to say that once in the room. Go ahead.
And
Carry on.
one last question.
As a system integrator, we usually used to recommend OT networks to our customers. Now with all the cybersecurity requirements and norms and standards, would you think it's better to recommend going IT? Because as you say, all the budget goes for cybersecurity, and any big company goes to IT versus OT. And I mean, it is hard to work with IT, but now that it's a cybersecurity issue, would you deem better for us to recommend their network or still keep OT networks as a separate? We have seen in the market that OT networks are almost banned from all big companies, so I don't know what your feedback is in IT versus OT.
So this is near and dear to my heart. The integrator is sort of the lost soldier in all of this stuff. You have manufacturers building cool technologies, and then you got the building and the end user, and there's folks in between where the integration work is actually very complex, and then you're trying to figure out from one company to the next who's responsible to give us budget to do all this extra security work that's actually really complicated. Unfortunately, the answer varies at every different company, and you have to find who sometimes it's the IT security leader. It just depends on the company, but that's where I would start. And if they're not giving you the right answer, see if they have a CIO.
Going in the IT network versus having a separate OT.
Oh, you're saying to
Yeah.
handle security just on the IT side? If you're connecting OT to IT, you have to do it on both sides. It's not a
Yeah,
one-sided thing.
I think I understand the question. So as opposed to pushing an OT network on an end user customer, you would rather propose going with a converged IT network for your deployment. I think ultimately, as a system integrator, you need to be flexible enough to be able to actually cater to both scenarios based on the end user's needs. And that's where you need to partner with the right technology partner that has that level of security to be able to support either architecture.
Yeah, and I think the question is, if you have a BAS system, do you put it on the OT network or the IT network? And I would say you typically want to do OT because of how different they are.
Yeah, it's probably not designed for the IT network, so you got to.
I understand, but it's getting to be a challenge for us to make, because we're responsible for the OT network. Once we install it, we're basically responsible for it. If we're in a service, if we install the system and we're in a service contract, it's basically under our umbrella, so.
Yeah.
Sounds like a revenue stream.
That's not our main line of work. Our main line of work is controls, and that's where we have our people. I know we all send them to training in cybersecurity, we do the phishing testing, but, it's not our main focus of business, so.
It's a complicated question, because it's coming down to whose responsibility is it. And that might, if you've got an SLA with them that you have to support the network that you build, I don't know. I don't know how these systems work on an IT network independently when they're OT systems. So that's a very complicated question with probably many answers, depending on who you talk to.
Thanks. Well, we're out of time. I'd like to help me join everyone to thank the panel for their great discussion. Thanks.
Thank you.